Hello and welcome to Security Panel brought to you by Celerity, the show that covers all the big topics in cybersecurity. I'm your host David Taylor, and today we're going to be reviewing IBM X-Force's Threat Intelligence Index for 2021. To help me do that, we've got IBM X-Force's Global Delivery Lead Adam Harrison and Max Baranowicz from Celerity. But first, let's take a look at some of the recent cybersecurity news stories that have been grabbing the headlines in the recent weeks. The first in the news is that the National Cybersecurity Centre has warned of a new surge of ransomware attacks hitting the education sector in the UK. In March, an education provider was hit with ransomware that affected 50 primary and secondary schools and 40,000 students in London. In April, there was two further UK universities that were hit by ransomware that had network outages as a result. The NCSE has updated its recommendations for organisations, which advises implementing multi-factor authentication, antivirus, prompt patching, disabling macros and scripting environments to help disrupt ransomware attack vectors. Elsewhere, Microsoft's Patch Tuesday announcement released that there was 50 patches to be updated. 5 of them were deemed to be critical, whilst the remaining 45 were deemed as important. They also noted that 6 of these were zero-day exploits that were actively being attacked. So please check out the announcement and update as soon as possible. And in other news, it was confirmed that the world's largest meatpacking company, JBS, has recovered from a ransomware attack which took out its operations in the US and Australia by paying an $11 million ransom. The FBI has pinned this attack on the Revil ransomware gang, who are known for attacking schools, hospitals, and charities, and are known to demand ransoms of around $30 million. Now let's get started with our guests and dive into the key findings from the IBM X-Force's Threat Intelligence Index from 2021. All right, so to kick things off, before we look into any of the key findings from the report, probably makes sense to delve into what it actually is. So, Adam, can you tell us what is the IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence Report?
Yes, certainly. So the Threat Intelligence Report is one of two reports that we're probably best known for producing. So we have the Threat Intelligence Report and the Cost of a Data Breach Report. And the two do sort of marry up quite well. So the Cost of a Data Breach Report really focuses on, as we've seen incidents through the previous year, how they've presented as a cost and the different factors which impact that. The Threat Intelligence Report really focuses on actionable intelligence. So taking the fact that IBM's X-Force Incident Response Team and IBM's managed services have visibility into a vast number of incidents and really breaking down the stats and analysing what we've observed, trends that we've seen as to what are impacting our clients and our partners' clients, and therefore what the focus needs to be for protecting organisations.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like X-Force is in a good place to provide these findings in the stats in there. So let's look at one of the key findings around the top target sectors. I found that the manufacturing and energy sectors had jumped from number 8 and number 9 in 2019 up to number 2 and number 3 in 2020. Adam, can you shed some light on why this might have happened?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly quote the stats. You know, we have the evidence. We've seen the trends that it's manufacturing and the energy sector both jumped quite significantly. And then we have to read between the lines a little bit. What we can see is that it was very much ransomware attacks that were driving that. So that was the type of incident that was dominating those industries. Manufacturing were the number one most targeted industry for ransomware attacks. And when you think about it, those are both industries where downtime specifically is measured in dollars. You know, the senior execs in the business will know if those production lines are offline for a number of hours, a number of days, whatever it may be, there is an explicit dollar value. And therefore, there's potentially a tendency or a likelihood that they'll be easier to convince or more motivated to pay a ransom. So to the extent to which ransomware actors are selecting their targets, which isn't always the case. In fact, commonly they might, fish a wide number of organizations and then choose which ones they're going to take the next step with, or potentially resale of access. So another group gets access. If you're being picky, then you're going to want to select sectors that either historically or it makes logical sense and more likely to pay a ransom. And I think that probably plays a significant role for both of those.
Absolutely. I mean, Max, you've probably seen in the headlines that a lot of organizations are getting hit with ransomware, but a few in the manufacturing and the energy sector are showing up more frequently than normally, aren't they?
Yes, for sure. Hacks in the energy sector are becoming more and more expensive as well, because the more innovation that's going into these companies, it just shows that there is money to be had there from a ransomware hacker's point of view. So where these organizations, they do measure in dollars, they make very attractive targets for things like ransomware and exploiting them for their money.
So the report found that ransomware equated to 23% of all cyber attacks. And of the ransomware, they found that 59% were now using the double extortion strategy. Is there a reason for that, Adam, that you can think of?
Yeah, good business sense is the short answer. Unfortunately, these ransomware actors, it's in a lot of cases very professional outfits. They have the market research. They know what is going to work to elicit a ransomware payment from an organization. And we've seen, maturing and improvement in the malware and the ability for the ransomware to actually encrypt, because, historically you might have had bad encryption. You were able to recover your data because the encryption wasn't sound. So they started fixing that problem. Then you see them focusing on building their reputation in the market. Big groups like Maze and Revil, who are almost considered to be true to their word. If they say they're not going to release your data, or they'll give you a decryption key, it's likely it'll work after the fact because it makes good business sense to them. And unfortunately, as we, as an industry have woken up, and as people are being, more capable of recovering from backups, having a greater level of resilience within their organization, and as people are building out plans to be able to respond to that portion. Invariably, the malicious actors have identified that, well, maybe you can recover, your business can survive an outage, but what about the court of public opinion and the impact if you actually have a leak and a data breach, coupled with the regulatory piece. So the secondary concern that if data's left the organization, you're likely to have to report it. There's going to be fines associated with it. So it ups the ante for their victims, and in their view, will increase the likelihood that a ransom's going to get paid, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And Max, obviously, Adam mentioned about the reputation. Do you think there's a lot of organizations who are being hit with ransomware who we just don't know about because they are paying and it's kind of going away like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of organizations that are paying and essentially making the problem worse in cases because they're not trying to fix the issues that they have under the bonnet. So ideally, when you use organizations like Celerity, we can actually help organizations when they're in a position where they have been hit by ransomware in the past, or they think using money is just going to make the problem go away when it simply doesn't. So yeah, I think the problem can only get worse if they don't actually do something about it, actually making a change to what they currently do and have as a process.
There's an extension of this sort of the moving towards the double extortion piece that I think is going to be even more important to Max's point, where I've seen, it's very anecdotal, it's only a limited number of cases that I've seen at the beginning of this year where actually there wasn't a ransomware drop, there wasn't that introduction of an outage, but rather the threat actors were moving straight to extortion. So they're coming in, they're doing a very traditional reconnaissance, they've got the level of access that would allow them to deploy ransomware, but they don't. Instead, they just steal vast swathes of data and then try and extort the organization. And again, it comes to that reputation piece. So in that case, an organization might think, well, if I pay this ransom, it's not in the public because I've not had a big outage. Everyone isn't already aware that there's a problem that's gone on. And so they might be, more encouraged to pay and try and sweep it under the carpet, not take the remedial steps that are required. And as we see time and time again, organizations who aren't doing the remedial work properly are viable targets down the line for another group to come in, or for the same group to try and extort them again, having said, well, we said we were going to leave you alone, but actually the ransom's now been upped, or we've got to come back with another attack. So it's very important that it's not just remedying the immediate issue, but you're looking at the wider picture and fixing the issue that caused it in the first place.
No, that's some great points there. So I think part of the ransomware, the way cyber attackers will get in, more often than not, will be through vulnerabilities. So looking at the report, they found that the top 10 vulnerabilities in 2020, only 2 of them were actually discovered in 2020. So the remaining 8 were previously known from 2019 and earlier. Why is this, Adam? Or have you got any reasons that can explain that?
I think to a certain extent we see it year in, year out. There is There are vulnerabilities that are just the gift that keeps on giving for malicious actors because they're not being patched and they're widely used. So I think heavy parts of that were the struts vulnerabilities that we've seen abused again and again for years. It's still out there. It's still something that can be exploited. So there is this latency, this lack of patching, which has been. The drum has been beaten on that for years, and we're not winning that battle. People aren't getting patches out there quickly enough. There's also, there's a little bit of a skew in the data this year, I think, particularly, and it does help to dive in and we look at even the number one vulnerability that we saw exploited, which were the series of Citrix vulnerabilities as a route in for actors. They kept us extremely busy, but almost reassuringly, they were 0 days as of late 2019, and it was the beginning of 2020 that they kept us very busy because organizations have matured a little bit, because it was very newsworthy, and therefore they identified, we're a user of that product, we need to immediately go and check, follow the advisories that are being published by certs, by governments, and identifying breaches that have occurred that could have been something much more serious if they hadn't caught them so quickly. So yeah, there is the doom and gloom that technically, year to year, it still looks like that trend continues. But there are a few glimmers of hope there, I think, where some organisations are reacting quicker and stopping things before they could have been a lot worse. And that was seen in some of the other stats in the report.
Definitely. I think, Max, do you have any advice for anyone who is struggling with sort of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so there's a number of points which were mentioned there. So older vulnerabilities have been around for a lot longer. So the code has been more matured, and as often these vulnerabilities lay without being patched merely because these people don't know that what they have in their systems aren't vulnerabilities at the moment. So, and it's not only that, there's also misconfigurations to their systems as well. That can also be partly the problem where we're able to help our customers at the moment get an understanding of what they've got, where the vulnerabilities lie, and where the misconfigurations lie as well, because equally something that's misconfigured can lead to a cyber attack and threat as well. So where we at Celerity, what we are able to offer at the moment is a cyber threat insight service, which essentially tests the strength of your security posture by simulating a real cyber attack across the attack vectors based on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So this just looks at general sort of attacks, but as well as typically ones that you've seen out there in the market as well, such as, say, SolarWinds attack, for example.
So next we're going to move on to the top 3 attacks that was found in the report. So unsurprisingly, number 1 is ransomware, which we found was 23% of all cyber attacks. Number 2 was data theft, which had a 160% increase from 2019. And the next one was server access, which had incredibly a 223% increase from 2019. Adam, do you want to shed a bit of light on that and maybe explain a little bit more about the server access side of things?
Yeah, certainly. The ransomware being the number one, that's been the theme for years because it's a truly very effective mechanism by which organised crime, but where malicious actors can get financial benefit. Interestingly, we've seen things like cryptojacking, the use of cryptocurrency mining malware. As the price of cryptocurrencies has gone up, that's eaten into the share of ransomware, but it's always, ransomware has always stayed in that number 1 spot as long as it's been, probably 5-6 years. I don't know exactly how long we first identified it as the number 1, but it's been a good stint. Data theft, it's exactly what we've just talked about. It's the maturing actually of the same actors who are conducting ransomware attacks. The fact that they're also employing double extortion and that they're stealing data at the same time, that's what's shifting the needle there and the dramatic increase. And it's like a market, it's a trend, it's seen to work, and multiple groups are at the same time taking on this new approach. Server access again. So that in and of itself is essentially incidents where we observed servers being accessed, that was the end game that the malicious actor got to at the point at which the incident was identified. So it's well worth noting that, had there been a longer dwell time, had that incident not been identified sooner, then a great many of those probably would have converted to ransomware and data theft incidents down the line. And really, the one that shifted the needle there, again, as I mentioned before, that Citrix vulnerability was the fact that it was out there, it was all over the news, it impacted a huge number of organizations, and therefore, and SolarWinds and other similar, sort of mass impact ones, therefore people started looking at their environments, and what they were finding is groups had accessed their servers, done some reconnaissance, in the days before they identified the issue, and they were therefore able to take remedial steps. And I dare say, a proportion of those were ransomware actors, and another probably larger proportion were people who were gaining access and then looking to resell it to ransomware actors and other malicious actors. So that's, I think, really the story behind the biggest change there, the server access piece.
Absolutely. Have you got anything to add to that, Max?
Yeah, I'd say that I'm not surprised by those sorts of numbers. Ransomware, yeah, it's been around for a long time. Data theft, yes, there's a big increase on there, but I think with server access as well, I think that only reflects the type of year that we've had, because due to the contributors being down to things like remote working, and most likely people are cutting corners as well, so people are providing access to servers and technology which they might otherwise not do in a normal world where we've not got a pandemic going on at the moment. So yeah, not surprised that these sorts of things are happening, and there is such an increase on things like server access and data theft.
Absolutely. I think we all know with the pandemic and the shift to remote work, and that kind of widens the attack surface area. So yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, well, Adam. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff covered in the whole report. What would you say is the most important finding?
Yeah, it's at the risk of repeating the same thing that would probably be the same answer multiple years in a row. The fact that ransomware is the single greatest threat to organizations, that it is something needs to be at the forefront of mind when you're considering your cybersecurity policies and processes and what you're going to put in place. That persists. The trend towards data theft and double extortion, we've not seen the end of that by any stretch of the imagination. So I think the key finding really is development from that ransomware posture. Well done. You've built a good method to back up your data to be able to recover from an incident in the event of encryption. Maybe you've got disaster recovery plans and the likes. But you need to take a more holistic approach in both being able to detect, instances of data theft. It's quite, potentially these are large data transfers out of your environment, so it becomes another detectable event, another thing that you could stop or catch the actors as they're doing it, if not before, hopefully. But also there's another much wider part of the incident response, having and understanding how you're going to engage with third parties, law enforcement, PR firms, law firms and entities to assist you in the event of what is likely to be a GDPR reportable event if it's a data breach and they've got to the real key data. It changes the edge of what the actual impact of these ransomware actors and these same groups is to a business, and that needs to be recognized in their planning.
Definitely. And Max?
Yeah, so I thought the most interesting part within the report was how scan and exploit is overtaking phishing as the primary attack vector in 2020. So people are looking more for technological backdoors rather than the human backdoor, but obviously both still remain huge factors in terms of priorities. So yeah, it's one to keep an eye on.
That's a really interesting takeaway as well, is if you think about it, you can instinctively phishing, it is and it isn't targeted, but there's a greater propensity that I want to target the manufacturing sector because they have a higher likelihood they're going to pay out, so I will attempt to spear phish and phish manufacturing. But scan and exploit really is, it paints the picture and it lets people know that anyone can be a target. If you have a vulnerable service exposed to the internet, then you're just as likely as every other organization to have that identified by a malicious actor, and therefore to be a potential victim. So no matter what your size, there is that requirement to understand what your attack surface is, to keep up with patching, and to be addressing vulnerabilities as they arise.
Absolutely. I mean, here at Celerity, and I'm sure IBM has the same sort of mantras. It's a case of when, not if, you're going to be hit by a cyber attack. So it's, you can't just sit there and say, no, I'm not being hit. Yeah, I'm gold, good. You probably have hit, and you just probably haven't even noticed at the moment. So just coming on to our final question, Adam, you mentioned the report. Obviously, it collates all the data, brings in a lot of stats, but the big part of it is offering recommendations. So, do you have any advice for our viewers off the back of the report?
Yeah, I think to that, that maturing of the ransomware actors to the double extortion piece, and as I kind of touched on it in the last point, having a plan. We had this; it came out in the cost of a data breach report. Literally, organisations who have a plan as a starting point fare much better during incidents. It shouldn't come as a great surprise, but trying to devise your response after the fact and in the heat of battle, as it were, is not the time to be doing it. You really want to have an understanding of what you're likely to encounter and how you will react to any of a myriad of different situations. So formation of an incident response team, having an incident response plan are kind of the best return on investment you're going to see in being prepared. And then the same mantra of being as prepared as you can to recover from a ransomware, a disruptive incident. That's going to come down to immutable or offline backups, having business continuity planning and things like that to protect the organization.
Awesome. Some great advice there. And Max, do you have any advice for customers looking at resilience?
Yeah, sure. So I think knowledge of your problems is key. You can't fix something that you don't know about. So simply ignoring problems that you do know about can only make it easier for cyber attackers. The ones where you don't have an understanding of where you are from a position, say if your board members asked you, they said, where are we at the moment in terms of our security posture, for example, when it comes to cyber attacks? And if you don't know the answer to that, or if you're not 100% sure, then it's something which, say, Celerity are able to do. We're able to offer these services like the Cyber Threat Insights, which we're able to provide you with a transparent view of where you are at the moment. This will help you prioritize your spending, your time and resource where you need it to, rather than at the moment, lots of customers, they'll think to make investments on, say, their AV or giving them some visibility, when actually they might have greater holes in their organization than they don't know about. We can help customers with that sort of that budget planning process of understanding where they need to focus their time.
Perfect. Thanks for that, guys. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for on today's show. I'd like to thank you both for coming on and giving your input on the report and giving some great advice to our viewers. Remember to join us next time for more security panels. And as always, speak to Celerity for any of your cybersecurity needs. Until next time, stay secure.